this term of buy-in, and don't have actually a sense of buy-in that people are saying, yes, this is what I'm buying into. I'm buying into this particular lifestyle, this vision of achieving these particular goals. And when those things are clarified and when those things are actually in place, then we can start to actually have some common grounds of agreement and be very clear about what it is that we want to achieve together and individually. So that service then becomes a real measure of our status, not really status is the right word, but actually our identity in a community, what we're actually doing to serve the whole. And on the basis of that, then devotees can expect certain benefits from the community itself. But just inherently being for instance, of course, in this sort of welfare state, it does work like that. You can get away with not working and still get money. In other places, it doesn't work like that. Other parts of the world, you don't work, you don't eat. You can't just sign on. And ultimately, it doesn't work. It's not a system that you can ultimately afford, especially in a degenerating society where people's values go down and dependency for working then also decreases. But that's another issue. So, but one cannot define what, that I want something without actually being willing to invest. I can't ask something from the government without actually working. So both of that has to be there, that type of give and take. And that's what really defines a devotee. Not necessarily that someone is inside a temple. Why often do we have this sort of polemic, devotees inside the temple, outside the temple? Because for and we know historically speaking, the devotees who are living inside the temple, in order for them to be living inside the temple, they have to do a minimum amount of 8, 9, 10 hours of service a day, live a certain type of lifestyle, or else they're not living inside the temple pretty fast. So otherwise they end up living outside the temple. And it's because of that extent of that service that they then consider themselves devotees, and then actually devotees who are not living in the temple, they tend to also fall into a similar trap. The doors are the devotees and I'm not a devotee. But it's not necessarily even the amount of work, but actually the volunteer spirit or the willingness, whatever the type of circumstances are, in order to render service. So even if someone is working full-time, and then we have many examples of that. We have an example of that here in the UK. We have historical examples of that, for instance, in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time, when no one lived in the temple. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement wasn't a temple-based organization. It had nothing to do with brahmacharis. It was all based on grihastas who all had some form of sustenance or employment. Generally they were brahmanas, so they maintained themselves by performing ritual activities. We don't read about that so much, but that's what they were doing. They did have a livelihood. But they're the ones who established and spread Krishna consciousness. And Lord Chaitanya was what received. Well, of course, when he took sannyas, that was something else. But prior to that, he was a teacher. And that's how he began his Sankirtan movement. He was a teacher. He wasn't a resident in time, but still with whatever it required to do the personal maintenance, that one takes that responsibility. And it may not be, well, it's not, may not be because you won't be able to do 8 hours a day. But that's not necessary, whatever one can do. Stare sita, shuddhigitantam varamakoti. So that one should stay in whatever position one is in, and from that position of strength, see how one can actually fulfill the overall needs of the community, to actually fulfill those goals of the community, worshipping deities. Here's Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda. Whose deities are they? Are they the temple president's deities? Are they the head pujari's deities? Are the pujari's deities? Who do they belong to? Whose deities are they? So when we talking about Krishna, that then becomes our common point. The Apostolics are actually our deities, and we have a responsibility. They have been actually called, established here. Certainly devotees may have deities in their homes, but those deities don't establish the same common epicenter as, for instance, here, the deities in the temple. They're meant to facilitate home worship. This is meant to facilitate community worship. It's meant to give actually a focus upon which community can come around together. And if you listen to different conversations and topics Srila Prabhupada had about, for instance, community activities, about devotees eating. Srila Prabhupada was very particular. Devotees ate together. That was, he wanted grihastas to come to the temple and eat together. One, because it wasn't his point, someone else mentioned, because it was obviously cheaper. But the other, because it was a communal activity. It was a common activity that bonded devotees. Dadati Pratigyanati, eating together is a communal activity. The act of worshiping together. Srila Prabhupada was very, very concerned that devotees do not, for instance, establish deities, worship deities at home at the cost of not worshipping the temple deity. They're both Krishna, and they're both equally Krishna, but the deities at home don't establish they establish a certain home atmosphere, establishing the temple in the home, whereas Srila Prabhupada established temples, and the concept of a temple is the center of a community. So one could say that this is actually one of the goals, is that temples become the center around which a community, and that community may be very large, but ultimately it has to coalesce around something. It has to have focal points. More than one, there'll be many focal points, because activities are also common activities. Like, for instance, you have a Rath Yatra. People don't have Rath Yatras in their backyard. They have Rath Yatra out on the street because it's a communal activity. It brings everybody together. We have festivals that bring everybody together. We have Janmashtami. You can have Janmashtami at home, but it's not the same as having a Janmashtami all together at the temple. So, similarly, the worship of the Lord in the temple is meant to also be that type of communal activity. And the temples themselves, are also a physical place of focus, although, for instance, something that one can consider is the concept of a temple itself is extremely restricting. Because when you talk about a temple, you usually talk about worship for worshippers. Whereas, generally speaking, when we talk about Krishna consciousness, we're talking about something more than just worship and worshippers. We're talking about actually spiritual culture. And we do more things here.